Hello everybody, it's Jess here. Welcome to today's video where I'm gonna walk you guys through my whole illustration process from sketch to finish. As an example, I'm going to use the illustration that you guys saw in the previous video of my fox, and I'll walk you guys through how I developed the finished piece from the sketch phase all the way to the finished painting. This was highly requested from the previous video, so I'm going to use it as an example, and I'll also show you guys other pieces that I've done for clients. I'll also show you guys some pieces I did in art school where I learned this process, and I'll show you guys some behind the scenes sketches of a large oil painting. Now I just want to remind you guys, I'm going to have a huge website update coming up and some new videos with announcements, so be sure to subscribe to my channel so you guys don't miss out. And don't forget to find me on Instagram. Alright, so you guys are probably wondering how I develop my finished pieces and what process I take to get there. I like to stay organized with my process with 4 steps, and the first thing I like to do is to create some thumbnails. This is the stage where you create a bunch of scribbles to get your ideas down on paper. When I did the thumbnails for the fox painting, they are super simple and just general big shapes, and I also like to jot down some words that I know I want to include in the mood of the piece. It took me a while before I really began to do thumbnail sketches, but they are super crucial and so helpful. They don't have to be anything too detailed. As you can see, they are super messy and simple. Many of you guys ask if I do create messy sketches, and yes, I absolutely do. In my art books video, I mentioned James Gurney, and in his book, he actually explains thumbnailing perfectly. Thumbnail sketches are tiny, loose, scribbly sketches used to plan a composition. Keeping them small stops you from getting too caught up with detail at first exploratory stage. That's a very accurate explanation, and as you guys could see, many artists and illustrators use this process to develop their work. For my fox painting, I only did about 6 small thumbnails, but usually I like to start out with ink or pencil, and I focus on my idea and creating the general shapes that I want to have in my composition. The scribbles are there for you to understand, and it's also a great way to warm up your hand and get yourself ready to create. I think of this stage as a brain dump sketch stage, and I get my ideas out, but I found that the more sketches that I do, the better. This really gets your gears moving, and you are forced to try out as many options as possible. And once I've decided on a position of the fox, I move on to the final sketch phase. This is where I develop the idea to a final drawing. Now, depending on the project, I either do digitally or traditionally, but for this one, I did the fox on my iPad and I drew him out in Procreate. And although I like to draw out on paper traditionally, drawing on my iPad actually allows me to move around shapes and work the composition any way I like. So I sometimes like to plan on here and then bring everything to paper and pencil. So as you guys could see, I'm moving around the composition, and I tilted his head because I thought he looked happier that way. And as soon as I felt like I developed the sketch as much as I could to its potential, I take this sketch and I print it out on physical paper to see how it looks large. I believe that nothing can compare to the physical feel of your piece, so printing it out and seeing it in person and holding it makes a huge difference. I was really pleased with all the placement, and it was time to move on to the next phase, where I also printed out the sketch on watercolor paper, and it was time to do the color compositions. During the stage, I establish lighting and explore color options. I always start out with a grayscale study to establish the lighting and where I want the sun to come from. So here I had the sun coming from the left, and on the right I had the sun coming from the back. As I always say, it's all about the lighting, so I really spend time and make sure all my values are reading. And once I did a grayscale version, I begin to move on and explore some color options. I try to create a specific mood for every piece that I make, so that's exactly what I try to capture here. I always give myself little swatches and notes, since I like to stay organized and remind myself on what exactly I want to achieve in the piece. And that's just what I personally find extremely helpful. For this illustration, I was going for a really joyful and happy feel, so I was really in between these last 2 color compositions that I did. And sometimes it's hard to choose, but I initially had this color kind of vision in my head, and after doing all the preliminaries, that's what I ended up going with. Alright, so when the 3 main stages are done, it's time to move on to the final painting. Depending on the illustration, I decide on the size, and I print out the sketch or transfer it onto the final surface that I'm going to paint on, and I always reference the color composition that I chose, and then I create my finished piece. As you guys can see, the color composition resembles the actual finish, but it has much more detail and I spend more time on it to develop it and bring the colors to life. Here is just a comparison of the color compositions done in gouache and watercolor and the finished illustration piece. I really wanted to create a piece that's going to make others smile, and every time I look at this fox, it just makes me smile too. So this is the full process that I took to create this fox illustration. This personally is what helps me create my illustration and stay organized whenever I really need to develop the details. I did this piece as part of a mini children's book series, and it was super fun to create. But now let's take a look at some more of my artwork where I use the same process. So about 3 years ago, in my first or second year of college and art school, I created this illustration of the show Breaking Bad as a movie poster for one of the assignments. We had to pick a show and create a poster for it. So I started off with my thumbnails and a nice detailed sketch traditionally, which I love doing on toned paper, and then I created these color compositions on illustration board, and I ended up going with the one on the right because I really like the colors, and now I realized I go for like a warm and cool contrasted color palette. This was done in gouache, and so was the finished piece. That way there are no surprises when you go on to your final painting. The final painting on the right is about 16 by 20 inches, so it's pretty large. And after making this, I was super proud of this. In art school, it was one of my first biggest illustrations that I've done. And here I am sharing the behind the scenes process with you guys. I think that taking the time to develop your paintings from the sketch phase all the way to the finished piece is super helpful, so I hope that you guys find it helpful too and try to apply these steps to your illustrations. And that's how I created this Breaking Bad piece. I was super happy with it, but now let's take a look at another piece where I used a similar process. I recently had a client contact me about a character design for her. She gave me all of the criteria that she wanted to see and asked me to make a digital illustration for her. Although she wanted the finished piece to be digital, I always start out with some scribbly sketches, and that way I can get my idea down on paper. I also created the finished sketch for her, which she approved and loved. I did that on my iPad as well. And again, in this step, I'm just working out the thumbnail and creating the right composition that I want for the final illustration. Now, the client that came to me with this piece was actually getting this as a gift for her son for his birthday, since she actually has a superhero name for him, which was super cute, and it was really fun bringing the ideas to life. So once the finished sketch was completed, I provided some options for color compositions, and I did print these out to see how they would look in person in color, and I also developed the composition and all the colors digitally, and then I sent the options to her to choose. At first, I immediately had this bright orange background and all these colors and this bright boom of spark in my head for the color option, and then I wanted to try out a blue option to see how it would look as another little alternative. It's great to trust your gut, but it's also good to try out different options because you never know what's going to look best. So after sending these two options to the client, she ended up going with option number 1, and she loved the yellow, so that's what I went with. And this is the finished illustration that I did digitally. And yes, you know the drill, I did print it out to see how it's gonna look large in person, and I had it framed for her and delivered, and she was super happy, and so was her son. What a cool birthday present, right guys? Alright, so that was my process for that piece, and I have one more to show you guys. And this is a large oil painting that I did. It's super heavy and doesn't fit in the frame. It's very large and framed currently, but I wanted to show you guys the sketches that I developed before making this piece. This painting has won several awards in different magazines, and it also was in a few galleries, but I wanted to show you guys this final sketch that I came up with. I first did these preliminary sketches of the portrait, and I actually did this for an assignment in art school as well. It also ended up being one of my favorite pieces, and as you can see, this is the sketch that it started from. I really wanted to convey growth in this piece. But I realized that if I haven't done all the sketches prior to this, I wouldn't have been able to get my mind moving and experiment with different ideas so that the finished piece can be completed. Now, there were many different steps that were in between this, of course, and it took many months to complete, but I think it's great to look back at the process and see where the painting originated from. And with that being said, that is all for today's video. I know there was a lot of artwork today, but I hope you guys enjoyed and I found this helpful. Getting into the habit of creating a process for yourself and staying organized really truly benefits in the end. It definitely takes time to get used to and develop, but once you do, you won't regret it. Everyone works and creates differently, so just find what works best for you. Thank you guys so much for watching and for your support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!